Let me tell you about my system real quick. My system is a, where's my left hand? Evening guys, Joe here doing a video today on a graphics card in more depth. Now this is a GTX 980. Specifically this is an EVGA superclocked 980. Thank you, Mr. Refrigerator. Now that prices have started to stabilize on graphics cards, not on the new side, but on the used side, do you want to go out and buy something like a 980? Well, that's the question I wanted to answer today. Now, I've done the Quad SLI 690s, I did 980s and SLI during the test, but I've never actually gone over and done some benchmarking with just this particular card. Now, this card is a replacement for one of my other cards that I sold, and as such, this card is a little bit held back in comparison, so I wanted to do the video and all the benchmarks on this particular card. Let me run you down the specs of the card. It is an EVGA GTX 980 superclock. It has 2048 CUDA cores, has a base clock of 1266 megahertz, a boost clock of 1367 megahertz, and an effective memory rating of 7004. Now, those are pretty good numbers, even in today's term. This card came out in 2014. That's almost 4 years ago now. And for a 980 to still be able to keep up with a lot of AAA titles is impressive. However, I think that's a testament to Maxwell, which is the architecture that these are on, as well as optimization in games currently, as well as the fact that the graphical qualities that were attainable using 980 and up cards, 980, 980 Ti's, obviously, Titan X's and whatnot, enable us to enjoy nice frame rates, great visuals at a lower price. Because you can go out and buy a 1080 Ti. If you buy a brand new one, you're still spending $1,000. If you buy them used, you can probably find a deal. I know where I can get 5 of them right now, from different people, of course. Anywhere from $600 to $750 for a Ti, and in the $500s for a regular 1080. And I'm absolutely not inclined to do so because this card does so well. The specs on my card are 75 plus on the core clock and 125 on the memory clock. I've had other cards that have boosted higher. In fact, the card I sold before I replaced it with this one would boost to over 1500 megahertz, about 1520. This one will only boost to 1467, sometimes 1475. It probably was overheated a couple of times because this card runs hotter than the last 3 that I've had, and replacing the thermal paste has helped a little bit, but I think it was too little too late. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few things that we did here. And as you can see, and I'll put the screenshots or the screen captures up next to each other, but in Hitman I ran it in 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. Now this is definitely not a 4K card. This is a 1080p all day long, 1440p for a lot of games card, if that makes any sense to you guys. What I mean by that statement is this card will play games in 4K. However, you're not going to have a PC experience. You're going to have a console experience, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. This card, I think, has a sweet spot at 1440. In fact, when I play any games now, I play them all at 1440 on this particular card because it's that good for that particular use case. But in Hitman, you can see that going from 1080p to 1440p results in a 30 FPS difference, whereas trying to go to 4K, and this is Hitman Absolution, so it's not exactly the newest one, but it's still a very viable test. It drops in 4K, it drops to under 60 frames per second, which is not where I choose to be. I prefer to have slightly lower graphical quality in order to maintain at least 60 FPS, because that gives you the most enjoyable experience. Obviously, the higher the better, unless you can't overclock your monitor or you don't have a monitor that can take advantage of it. That particular monitor overclocks to 75 Hertz, even at 1440p, so it enables me to have a enjoyable experience as long as I get over 60 FPS, no screen tearing. For Grand Theft Auto 5, I enabled FXAA and MSAA at 2 times, as well as turned all the graphics up to very high and ultra where applicable, and I ran the tests again. At 1080p, it's a very smooth experience. At 1440p, with everything cranked up, it's a little bit slower than I'd care for, but still very playable. You lose about 20 FPS. At 4K, you're under 30 FPS, and that is not good enough, in my opinion, for a quality gaming experience on the PC. If I want a 30 FPS gaming experience, I'd play it on console. Lastly, I did Counter-Strike Go, and at 1080p, obviously it will max out where I'm currently at. I don't know how to enable higher frame rates. If anybody does, leave that in the comments. But at 1080p, maxes it out, hits about 280 to 300, no problem. At 1440p, it's still over 200 FPS, but only just barely. And as you can see in 4K, that's where it finally takes a hit graphically, which is pretty impressive for a game like this. And it drops it down to around 100 to 115 FPS. Still completely playable and runs great. However, I'm not going to run it at 4K. That game doesn't require 4K to have a good experience. Now, I've already done benchmarks on this particular card in 3D Mark on Firestrike, and in Firestrike it did over 15,000 for a single card. So I'm not going to run that test again. I've done that 3 times already. However, I did run Superposition Benchmark at both 1080p high, where it scored over 7,000 points, and 4K, where it was in the 4,000s. So, conclusion time. GTX 980. 1 generation old, still a really good card. Powerhouse of a card for the money. If you can get one for the right price, I highly suggest you do it, because you'll get a great 1440p experience and you won't be paying super high prices. If you just want a 1080p experience, this will extremely well do it. And if you want a 4K experience, you're going to have to go to a Pascal series card or a couple of these in SLI. I believe, and I've seen testing a couple of times, that these in SLI can keep up with a 1080 until you overclock to 1080 anyways. Now, a word on manufacturers. I have become an EVGA fanboy when it comes to graphics cards. My 690s are EVGA, and this 980 is EVGA, my 1030 is EVGA, and a few of my other cards have been EVGA, and they've all been exceptionally good cards with very good overclocking capabilities. Now, when I said earlier in the video that this card doesn't overclock as well, what that means is it doesn't overclock that much from the already high boost clock which is in place for this card. Now, to go from 1266 to 1475, or even let's say 1467, is a 200 point improvement, which is about a 15% improvement over the base clock for this card. That's about it. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Click over here to subscribe, and you can click about where my face is, and you can see another video. And as always, I'll talk to you later.